If you want to learn how to gain insights you can act on and solve business problems with data, all while building a data-driven culture at your organization, sign up for Pragmatic Institute's new course, Data Science for Business Leaders. Find out more at pragmaticinstitute.com/data. Welcome to Data Chats, a podcast by Pragmatic Institute and the Data Incubator, where we tackle data topics and trends with experts, industry leaders, instructors, and alumni. I'm your host, Chris Richardson, and today I'm sitting down with Tash Joslin, co-founder of Mojo, a data agency that helps businesses use their data to deliver impact for growth. Tash, thank you so much for joining me today. Let's get started with a little bit more about your background. Maybe you can tell listeners where you're coming from and what you're doing right now.
Brilliant. So thanks for having me also. Nice to talk to you. Where I've come from is I've actually been in data for quite a long time. I joined a very well-known data agency in the UK called dunnhumby, who were the founders of all the analysis behind the club card, which is a Tesco club card. So that's a supermarket here over in the UK. Mm-hmm. So they were actually looked at how they could use all the data from the club card to really help interact and communicate with their customers in a more effective way. So it was like really, really heavily data, loyalty data, using direct mail back in the day. I'm talking back in 96. So we're, talking about hard data, large data, big data, to the point it was so big that we couldn't even process it. We had to take a 1% sample of the 20 million customers to be able to then process and analyze the data. So that was, as we're saying, 25 years ago. And, life has changed quite a lot from a data perspective now. But we have quite similar kind of challenges of how to use that data to really drive the impact that businesses want. Challenges is still there, so that people still want to be able to process the data, have people who have got skills to be able to analyze and get insight out of the data. But obviously the data we've got is vast, it's quite different. 25 years ago, we didn't have the internet as much as we have now. There wasn't social media, there wasn't all the lovely data that we get around that. And obviously we have moved on quite a lot from the technology, which enables us to utilize that data as well.
Yeah, and I would imagine some of the questions that are asked of data experts, even then and now, is, always about growing business, improving customer experience, understanding customers better. What are some of those things that if you were thinking about what you started out doing and now what you continue to do or what you advise people to do, what are some of those things that are always there, always have been, and then maybe how have things changed specifically?
Yeah, often one of the biggest use cases we have is about who are my customers? Who are my most valuable customers? What are they buying? What can we get them to buy more of? What can we get them to buy again? How do we get more of them? So often that comes, most businesses will have a customer, and actually that becomes one of the sort of like almost the foundations of actually how do we grow a business? Let's grow the business from understanding our customers more, sell to them more, and give them, more relevant communications when we want to talk to them, to be able to then develop that relationship, to be able to become first choice for the business. It tends to be, though, that where the transition comes for a lot of businesses is when they've moved from almost being that product centric. So actually they're trying to sell, they're trying to just think about growing the business through innovation of the product, to then really become much more customer centric, to be then thinking, well, actually, let's really understand the customer to be able to then start differentiating our product to really support the customer as well. So it's all the NPD gets really grounded in who their customers are. Then they can really start playing with in the competitive set to be able to say, right, how can we be over and above our customers, our competitors, to be able to deliver that insightful information, which is going to sell this product more. So I think the customer tends to be one of the biggest use cases, but obviously there's lots of other uses of data nowadays.
Yeah, and I'm curious about some of the challenges that you found maybe early on or more recently that prompted you to start Mojo, and what are the things that you thought you could solve, and what were the problems that you were seeing?
Yeah, I mean, where we came from after I worked at Dunnhumby, I then went to work in marketing and advertising agencies, and so I worked in large London advertising agencies with large organisations who have a lot of customers, and they very much had a great use of data in different areas and different pockets, but it was becoming more and more evident that actually there was still this massive gap between the data teams and the technical teams and the business teams. So actually the data and the technical teams were busily doing their analysis, they were creating amazing platforms from technology, and all of that was getting smarter and smarter. But what was happening is it wasn't actually translating into the business. So one of the reasons we created Mojo was we had to almost bridge that gap between the data teams and the tech teams and the business, so they can start really, really utilizing that data to help them solve business problems. And actually that goes both ways, because where we've seen sort of the data teams and the technology significantly increase, we are now in the best place that we've ever been from technology. You can buy a platform to do practically everything. And skills are, even though there is a skill shortage, there are more skills and more people in data than there's ever been. We still need the businesses to create the need for it. And they also need to really start understanding how to get the most out of the data as well. It needs to go both ways. And a lot of people are big advocates of data people need to be stepping up and understand the business, which there is that to a certain degree. But actually on the flip side of that, businesses really need to improve, general business people need to improve their data literacy just to make data become the everyday currency that it should be to be able to support the business function and making better decisions, and having the evidence to have the evidence in every meeting, in every conversation, to know what the opportunities are, and actually even more than the opportunities where they're actually not working as well as that they could be.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we've heard a lot, right? That there's business concerns and data concerns, and obviously there's overlap, but oftentimes the professional disciplines are different enough that if not misunderstanding, then at least maybe tension in priorities or how people are viewing the business and the problems that are there. How do you start to bridge that gap? What are some of the ways that you've been able to put, I guess, a different lens so that people can see the other side better?
Yeah, I mean, we will always start with what the business problem is. So we will always help businesses of all different sizes to really understand what they want to use the data for. We've worked with a lot of businesses which basically they want to have data, they want to have a data strategy, they want AI, they want analysts, and then you actually challenge them on what they actually want it for, or what impact or benefit is going to be to the business, and they haven't really thought it through. And I think the problem with that, if it's not owned by the business, it almost becomes something which is given to somebody else rather than it being sort of owned and seeing something which is going to be really valuable to really revolutionize a business. And as soon as you get that relationship between it being almost like the responsibility to go somewhere else to solve the data problem, it's harder to make it really, really ingrained into the business every day in the business DNA. So by starting with the business and actually understanding the benefit of that and start talking about it in a business language, it enables people to really start to see the benefit that that's going to be, rather than an add-on project, or the data guys or the tech guys are brought into the room at the last minute, or it needs to be really embraced at the beginning to be able to bring the right people into the room to have that right discussion. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of businesses and a lot of data projects have started the other way around. They've basically gone in and they've built the infrastructure, they've built the teams, they've got a data scientist, and they've failed because those teams and they might have a fantastic infrastructure, but at some point someone's going to go, well, what value is this delivered to the business? And actually, if people start saying that when the project's been running for 3 years, is a bit late. And you'll find that it hasn't been scoped in the way that it's actually going to solve the business as well. Because again, it's interesting because a lot of people are scared of data, and a lot of people think it's somebody else's job. It's a technical job, or you need to be very statistician or skills and orientated.
Yeah.
But actually, business people often know how the business works and the dynamics of the business and the almost, I know some of the technical terms within the business. And it's like they're the best to know of how to use the data, how to measure things, how to understand what are the triggers for something which is going to be, whether it's something's working in an opportunity way or it's not doing too well. And they need to give that information to the technical leads, because otherwise they won't know. Technical leads will know how to put data into a structure to be able to make it available, but they won't know how important a certain piece of data is to the business. And it's trying to unlock that conversation without the fear of, it's all about data, it's all about technology.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, something I think I hear a lot is that, data can provide some great insights. And so everyone kind of falls into this idea that as soon as we have data, we will have insights. And I'm sure you've seen that it doesn't work as a one-to-one, like just add data for insights. So how do you start to, maybe when you come in or when you're working with groups, how do you start to move from, okay, you want data, you have a business structure, you have ideas about how the business is currently working. How do you move on to deliver what people often want, which are sort of magical insights from the data?
Yeah. We often say data isn't magic.
Yeah.
It's definitely that is the case. And I think a lot of it comes down to having a bit of a common language and taking the word data out of it. And actually, by creating common language, even just getting consistent terms agreed, so you're actually talking about everybody in the business is talking about the customer in the same way, and that that is defined in a same way. It enables you to start talking about those things versus always about the underlying data. You've got basically everybody on the same page. Everybody knows what the key metrics are that they are using. It doesn't get questioned every time. It's basically the definitions and the common language throughout the business will translate through sales, marketing, customer service, product development, to be able to then start feeling more comfortable with the insight. Because then it's easier to ask questions, isn't it? So it's almost like thinking about your customers, how many customers have shopped between this particular window. It becomes a more insightful business related question. So you're asking about generally, what are the customers buying? How do they, what time of year are they buying? And everybody's comfortable with a definition of customer. Enables to have everybody have a top level conversation. So then you're talking about the insight. You're not necessarily just talking about the underlying data all the time. We often find clients, they will then, as a business person, will go, oh, I need that data. I want a spreadsheet of the number of customers over the last 6 months. And they haven't got the definition of a customer. They haven't got necessarily exactly what they're buying. So they're sending a very, very woolly brief to the analyst. The analyst will then interpret it how they all interpret it, especially if there isn't a common language around the definition of a customer and the definition of a product even. It's like these things sound really simple when you're having a conversation, but with data, unfortunately, it's rules, and you have to sort of like tell it what it was you want to hear. But if you've got all of that sort of like agreed up front, and that the business are interested then to say, do you know what, actually, if we all agreed on this, then the insight will start flowing much, much easier, and it become more obvious, and you can have the conversation. You don't have to worry about, is that number right? Is that number wrong? And because nobody wants that. Everybody just can focus on, well, that has changed because we know that number is different to what we saw last week, and we're confident, we trust that information is right because we've all agreed up front what the definition and the consistency of that information is.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, as somebody who's taught communication, just the fact that people could have differences of opinions or just a complete misalignment with like what is a customer or what is the data that we're talking about is just fascinating. I wonder if you have any examples of ways that people have maybe defined customer in two different ways or are talking about data in very different ways. What are some of the sort of miscommunications and ways of bringing people together on something so simple as maybe like, sales or customers? How could people mess that up in terms of the conversation?
Yeah, just from a customer, sometimes it depends on what products you're selling, but a lot of people like to understand what an active customer is. So some people will say, right, an active customer is someone who has shopped within 3 months. Somebody else in the business could say, well, actually, no, it's someone who's shopped within 12 months. And then if you ran those two different scenarios through the through the numbers, you start to get very different numbers. So if one area of the business is tracking against a different definition of active, they might be looking great, whereas actually the 3 months, which is where, and then it's just like you could end up missing, well, actually looks like our customers are dropping off after 3 months, and that was actually quite insightful. So as a business, we're better off looking to see when is that drop off time of our customers, and then agree that actually an inactive customer is someone after 4 months. And then you can say, right, we need to do something about that. We need to improve that inactivity, or we want to reduce the number of people after 4 months. So you can start having, it enables you to have a consistent conversation.
Yeah. Are there any other definitions or words that you have found people might misconstrue? That's interesting to think about, just starting the conversation with what is an active customer? What are some other terms that might get miscommunicated?
I mean, how to calculate profit, how to calculate, is it including with VAT, not VAT, what the rules are around that, looking at whether you include things people have sent back, deliveries which have been returned, whether it's breakages, how do you allow for all of that within your finances, taking sort of like understanding the currency of the data. So often, and this comes down to making sure that you have your data accessible in the right way and it's governed in the right way. But if you don't, you can have people who have different hierarchies of data, which is more important. So if someone's got 2 different telephone numbers or different email addresses, some people, if they do the hierarchy one way, they could get one different address. If they do it the other way, they could get an email, the other way around. And then that again can end up, you can have all different kinds of numbers which are going around the houses and on mailable addresses or non-mailable addresses and those kind of things. Then actually you've got every business has its own language around, what they call things. And whether you're, a marketing qualified lead, a sales qualified lead is SQL to a data scientist, and SQL means something very different. So it's a programming language. So it's just like you can then start getting the business and the data people talking, using acronyms in a completely different way to be able to to communicate. Yeah. I would say that, just back to what you were saying about communication, generally it is probably one of the biggest barriers to getting the technical teams and the business teams working and collaborating because they are coming from it a completely different way. Often the businesses will say things, I just need this number. And the amount of technical teams that would hear that and the complexity of getting just that number can be incredibly difficult. And it can really undermine, and it can really put the technical team's backs up, because it's so difficult to be able to get that number versus actually ask. So there's a couple of different things which we found work really well to be able to bring that collaboration and improve that communication better. And some of it is actually education to the business people to really understand what data is and isn't available, so that they can actually refrain from using that kind of question. Like really start thinking about, rather than the data points that they're looking for, widening it up and asking what it is that they really want to achieve by just having that number, because that enables then the technical teams to really think about it a bit more laterally. So if they don't, because they could spend hours trying to get to this number and it might not actually be what the business really needs anyway, they can do it slightly in a different way. But also the level of accuracy that the technical people will naturally go to will be really, really high. So there needs to be like how accurate does this piece of information need to be? Are we just looking for trends or indication, direction of travel, or are we looking for financial sort of 0.0 to 0.00 indication? And to what level is it? And that can actually save a lot of time to say we need it to be correct and we want to be able to understand the trends, but we're just looking for direction of travel. So if it don't waste huge amounts of time trying to get it to the precision of that level, we just want to look at the direction. So it's like understanding what the different motivations of the two different groups are is actually really quite important when you start to bring the collaboration. It's not just about the technical skills, it's about how each team would start to approach that question, and they'll see it in their own way.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. Even just the idea of how specific do you need to be or how accurate does the number need to be can change things in huge ways, I would imagine. I wonder, and I promise not to dwell on the communication language bit, but one more question about that. So many businesses talk about leveraging data, but I'm sure that means very different things to different groups. I wonder how you would imagine leveraging data or what that might mean in certain contexts. Like, what are we actually talking about when we say leveraging data?
Genuinely does mean different things to different businesses, and it's actually because there's so much and there's so much different types of data that
Mhm.
leveraging data in a marketing team could be very different to leveraging data in a product team. For a start, leveraging data in a product team could be all about customer research, and so you're looking for, going out to different groups of customers to be able to find out more emotional information to be able to support that product development. Whereas in the marketing team, you could be using very metric based data, using Google Analytics to look at your web tracking capability. You could be building a segmentation using your transactional data to understand how your more valuable data it is. So data for me is a catch-all term for a lot of different tracked data points within the business or asked data points within the business. But it really does come down to what your business wants to achieve. And then once you understand that, you can then start to build your data strategy. So your data strategy would be able to look at all the different parts in the business to determine what the opportunities are and what tools, capabilities, skills you need to be able to support that business benefit. So if it's all about marketing and you want to improve your marketing capability, improving your marketing capability, making better decisions about where to invest, that could all be your whole data strategy could be surrounded about, right, we need to get more insight about the customer. We need to build segmentations. We need to track all the transactions or interactions with the customer. So we need to build that database to be able to then harness that data and leverage that to be able to then ask the right questions of that customer, ensure that we've got all tracking across all our different campaigns, our different touch points to be really able to then create that insight loop back to say, how am I testing and learning all my different campaigns to be able to then improve on ensuring that you're going to the right customers and you're using the right channel mix, you're using the right messaging mix. And I think, they're all very, very, and then in products, it's a different scenario. So it's data is an enabler. It's like the business will always be the business, and then you'll use different data enablers to support the business. That's why we always start with the business, because it has to start there. You can't push up the insight. The data isn't magic. The data won't change your business. The business has to know what to use the data for to be able to help it and enable it to move forward. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, and sparked more. So I want to ask
Yeah,
about
I mean,
strategy then.
it's always, so it's this data. You need to have the data strategy because
Yeah.
that does depend on what the business is and also the level of maturity of the business. So if you've got a business which has always, has always had some form of data and had some form of insight and analytical capability, whether that's in the marketing department or within sales team or the customer insight teams, you might go in and just understand how to make that data more accessible to everybody and create the consistency, put governance in place so everybody's using that in the same way as well, because it's incredibly important. But if you're starting off from a really very base level and you've never really even thought about what data is within your business, then it needs to be starting to understand what data have you got, what your data landscape is, and what the opportunities could your business do if they knew more information about something, more insight or more evidence. If they knew that evidence, how would that impact their business?
Yeah. So if you were consulting, let's say just, a mid-sized organization, and they had, let's say, a starter strategy, but clearly we're looking for insights or help before they roll out anything major. What are some of the flaws that you might see, or what are some of the corrections you might suggest when you're looking at business strategies? So in other words, when they're starting out to just draft strategies, what are some of the points that are often, needing improvement?
I think what has happened for a lot of businesses is they'll go straight to the tech. They'll look for the platform of what they need to. They'll just look for the tech to give them the answer, and the tech won't give them the answer. It's spend time almost doing an MVP, kind of understanding what data is available within your business, look at doing some form of very top level analysis. So it's like a lot of, if they have already got some data in the business, don't worry about thinking about how to host it and how to put it into a platform to make it accessible straight away. Take it off platform wherever you are to be able to then do some analysis to start to understand the data a bit better, to understand sort of like to create the common language, to start understanding how good quality it is. Because it could be for the first project you need to do is that the data is just quite bad quality. So actually your first job might be, how do we improve the quality of this data? It could be that the call center have never ever asked for the email address, or have never asked for permissions, or they've always gone to the top drop down box of the list when they're filling in a form. And if you haven't got the data, or you're not tracking things within your digital environment, if you need to be fixing all of that to be able to make sure that the flow of data coming in is actually useful and good quality before sort of like investing in the technology.
One question or one conversation I've had recently that I'd love for you to weigh in on is how much data to track. And I know it obviously depends on the context, but there's kind of two approaches that to me both have some merit, right? There's one that is track absolutely everything that you can and, collect as much data as you can, which I think a lot of businesses are going towards. But also what I've heard is that can just be mostly noise, or what is it called? Black data or dark data, where it just is never touched afterwards. And so what you really ought to do is focus in on very specific data points. That's not to say don't necessarily collect them, but don't even bother looking at them. What you want to do is focus on a few data points to answer very specific questions. And I wonder if you have advice for people who are kind of weighing those things. Should we collect everything and look at everything, or should we only look at like a few things to really figure this one thing out?
Yeah, I am definitely in the school of fewer. I think by collecting everything just in case, I think demonstrates a lack of planning of the business. And it goes back, probably, which I've said about 50 times now, they don't know what they're going to do with it. And until they actually, and what will happen is it will become the currency of the data will get old. And, before you know it, it's useless anyway. And you might have actually been prohibitive to people providing that data, or the data being tracked. So the quality of the data is probably lower as well. So I would definitely go for having a plan for what and why you want that data. You often will find that once you start asking certain bits and you start using it, you realize actually it's slightly wrong and you need to be either asking for slightly different data or something else would be more beneficial. So that gives you the agility to then switch to sort of like, rather than having all this legacy data, then you've got nothing to do. It becomes too complicated. And you're right, it's just like people then feel that they need to do something with it and it's not useful. So I would spend more time planning what you want to use the data for and working that out. That would definitely be my advice. And then work out what data you want to have. And you can always build on that data when you need more. It is chicken and egg. And I can understand why people fall into the trap of just like, right, we need everything now. But in reality, it will never get analysed or used because it takes time. And a lot of people aren't even using the basic stuff. So get used to using the basic stuff. Get consistent with using the basic stuff. Don't try to reinvent it every 5 minutes. Everybody, it's not boring to just do the same thing over and over again. But once you've got that, you can then improve on it and build on it and get better. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about once you start collecting that data in whatever way, like once you start executing on the strategy, let's say it's well planned, you have a good strategy, you're collecting the data. How have you seen it best work when you transform that data into meaningful insights, maybe stories or narratives that can be shared within the business? What does that look like, or what are some good examples of that? Once you've started to collect data, how should that be circulated, or how have you seen it circulated well for making actual improvements and sharing insights?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, what I'd love all businesses to be is that in every conversation and every project will always start with the evidence and the data. So therefore, you're just living and breathing it all the time. But I recognise that obviously not every business is there yet, and that's a little bit of an aspiration. So it still feels like data gets presented as this big show, kind of big reveal. And I think this is where you need to make sure that whoever's doing the big reveal knows the context of what they're doing. So it's in the sense of, it's not just the analyst's job to just do the numbers. They need to know why they're doing the numbers. It needs to be brought into the context of the business planner or the business strategist to be able to then really help those numbers deliver what they're trying to say. And a lot of people will fall into the trap of just showing shed loads of charts, and because it's taken the analysts months to produce this amazing model. And most people aren't interested in that. Most people are interested in the impact it's going to make and the story it's telling. So even if you can tell a story about the insight without even mentioning data, you're probably onto a good thing, because then it's grounded within the business, and then the data is just the evidence to show why that is the direction of travel of the business to be able to move it forward. It goes back to communication again. It's like, I think data people want to be showing the work, that tend to be very highly intelligent people who have, solved lots of very complex things, and they want to show that detail because they went through the journey of understanding how it all worked. But most people just want the answer, and that's probably the transition. I suppose on the other level is getting people then more used to the different metrics in the business. I mean, dashboarding is great. It's a great way to get people more aware of how the business is being measured and how you can start understanding trends, and you can improve people's literacy quite quickly, be able to understand the impact of the measure. It's just that they can end up just reams and reams of different dashboards, never used. And you've got to be careful of that they just fall into a bit of a black hole. You just have to have a bit of a strategy really about what it is that you want to demonstrate and get people to use.
Yeah. Have you seen changes more recently, or maybe things that are just starting to appear in terms of how data is being organized? Like, I'm just imagining that warehouse of paper in the 90s that was, you could only do a 1% sample of it because, you just have so much data and it's physically stored, probably like printed out or something in some cases. Now there's obviously all of these options, like you said, and a lot of people will start with the technological solution or the platform instead of the question. But once they do start thinking about organizing that data, are there newer ways to do it, or is it still the same basic principles, just maybe faster computing?
I think this is where data governance really comes into its own, which I think data is given a bit of a bad name because it sounds so boring. It's just like, it's like anything with governance in it is going to, it's like rules based, and literally people are going to be switching off. Most people can switch off when you start talking about data, let alone if you're putting rules on top of that data. Good luck. But it's really essential. And it's like, how do you make sure that everybody is using the data in the same way? How do you organize that data? How do you make that data available to different people? How are you storing that data? The lineage of that data. So like I was talking about the hierarchies earlier, it's just like, how are those rules set to look at the different hierarchies of data? All those things really do need to be governed, and understanding then the ownership of the data at different levels as well. So it's, again, we've talked about data capture. The data owner of a lot of data capture will never be a technical person. It would be the person who is running the call center, because they need to be responsible for the data coming into the organization and the quality of that data. So it's understanding how it's managed, how it's governed, how it's used. And it's something which a lot of organizations aren't enabling or aren't bringing into the fold, because it's like, just feels like it's another layer of bureaucracy. But I think it's something which is really essential to really get the most out of your data. And again, it's doing it in that kind of communication way that shows the benefit of it. If by putting in a governance program, you can improve the trust within the data by, that everybody will trust the data, and then you've got data which people are making firm decisions on to be able to spot opportunities, which is going to grow the business by 10%, starts to create a narrative that sounds more appealing than we're going to have a data quality meeting every month about talking about the volume of email addresses, which most people wouldn't want to attend.
Yeah. Well, and I also wonder how you might phrase or how you might get people together, because if I'm part of an organization, I hear, we're going to have a meeting so that we can get the absolute best quality of data and know that, with confidence that this is accurate and things like that, so that we can make more money or we can, deliver on this promise. That's more appealing than we have to follow this rule of GDPR, which is
Yeah,
definitely how I've been introduced to some things, right? Like
yeah.
there's a rule, we don't know who made it, it's just related to the GDPR and therefore you have to do this. So I wonder if you've seen ways of, as you started to say, like communicating these things in the most effective way. How would you suggest, if you are tasked with making a data governance meeting, what might you want to call it and how might you want to introduce ideas?
It's really difficult because it's just like, it's sometimes it is, you have to actually face up that it is data governance and it is about the rules, but there's a couple of like analogies that we've used. One is just about the rules of the game, so you wouldn't throw everybody onto, I love football, soccer, you wouldn't just throw 11 team members onto a football pitch without telling them the rules of how to play the game. They'd pick the football up and run with it, or they'd do it all differently. Everybody would do everything differently. So it's actually, what you're trying to do is you're just trying to give everybody the rules of the game so that we can actually save time, because people aren't making it up every time. You think about how inefficient a football match would be if everybody decided to play it in a different way. So it's like, how do we just incorporate that kind of thinking to make it, just to get everybody on board and to be able to go, we're taking the pain off you, we're telling you how to do this, you just have to adhere to it. The other way, which we find has quite good synergy, is like brand guidelines. Brands are incredibly important to a business. They've got huge amounts of intangible value and you need to protect your brand. So you would never just allow anybody to change the color, change the font, change the position, change the size, that you've got to go through quite strict governance. But you wouldn't call that brand governance, you call that brand guidelines, or, your, I can't even think of the word now, of the organizer. You often, in big organizations, you have a team which are the ones who would look after the brand. And often you have to go through the brand, that team, to be able to get it signed off. And, people don't seem to have a problem with that. It's because they really value the brand and how important the brand is to the business. So that's another way of really starting to position the value of data and within that kind of governance, rules-based approach.
Yeah, I like that. That actually makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking like, mid 20th century, that was a new idea to say, here's the brand. This is how we have to organize it. Don't keep, just, randomly choosing how you're going to present the brand. Now that's totally acceptable. I don't think anyone would
Absolutely.
question that. And
Yeah.
but data governance is definitely earlier in its stage, right?
Yeah.
And we're definitely seeing changes, as people like you talk about this, but it's not the same as brand recognition at this point, which will be
No.
interesting. And one of the last questions I want to ask you about is looking towards the future of, thinking about problems that you're trying to solve with data, thinking about organizing data. Are there any trends that you see us going towards that may become more normalized or more common, but are really just starting out right now? Anything new in terms of thinking about or organizing data that we should look out for in the future, maybe?
I think from a technical point of view, yeah, I mean, of a technical point of view, there's so many different thoughts on how to structure data to make it more accessible to, and it's changing all the time. And there's fors and against for doing all the different structure of data and platforms and everything like that. I think, which I wouldn't really like to say what the trends were on that, if I'm honest. I think,
Yeah,
I think
you
it's
don't want to
more
go on
to,
record
no,
20
it's more, it's
years
just,
later, find something else.
yeah, it's more actually, I suppose, I think it will sort itself out. And I think it's almost like there's a danger of all of the new organization of data and health hosting of data and making the data accessible. It all becomes an excuse for not just getting on and using the data in some ways, because it's never in the right format, it's never in the right structure, it's never accessible, it's never, it's an excuse a little bit for the business to go, well, we can't get the data's not right, there's this, so we're not going to use it, we're just going to make it up, which happens with a lot of organizations which are going through data transformation, spent huge amounts of money, and individuals within teams are still just making up the insight or the strategy based on experience, gut feel, which goes a long way as well. So I think personally, I would like to see trends happening about democratization of data, so that actually it's not just seen as data, it's just seen, how we utilize computers nowadays. You wouldn't think I need to be a computer science, I don't need a computer science degree to use a computer. I'm a business person who is the technology is enabling me to write an email to somebody and they're going to understand what I'm saying. And I think data needs to become embedded in an everyday, it's a business tool. And there's a lot of reasons why it is different to that, because you need the skills. We've got low level skills and there's a lot of technical capabilities to make the data more accessible. But I think, the business needs to up their game, I think, to embrace
perfect segue to my last question I wanted to ask you is, for people listening, whether they are on the data side, in the weeds of dealing with data, or whether they're maybe thinking more strategically from a management perspective, what are two things that they could do today that might have an impact, a significant impact in how they're either thinking about data strategies or thinking about data as a tool? I like that idea. If data is a tool that everyone can use, obviously with different levels, what are two ways that they might want to use that tool, or maybe reconsider how they're using that tool, like right now, to start having a change on their organization, or to start seeing a difference in how data is being used in their organization?
I think it's about thinking about data as solving a problem versus solving the problem of data. So maybe it's flipping it on its head and just thinking about that. If I knew this piece of information, insight, evidence, what could I do differently within my business? And then work out how I could get that. So if there was one piece of information that I'd really want, which could fundamentally change my business, what would it be and how do I get it? And then I think on the other side, probably if you are in the weeds of actually always doing lots of analysis, you never see the impact of that analysis. You don't know what's happening to it, because that often happens with people, is really ask questions. Never take a brief when someone's asking you, can I just have this piece of data? Understand why, because you'll never be able to create that data. You'll never be able to give that analysis into that person's brain if you don't ask actually what do they want to do with it, because they haven't worked it out. So it's not going to be right. You have to almost get them to work out what they want to use the data for.
Yeah, I like that. I think even just those questions of not what data, but what might I want to know, can be very helpful. And then on the other side, as you said, why might you want to know this? Those are questions that seem obvious, like what is a customer, but can get misconstrued in so many different ways. And I'm sure we've all seen that. So yeah, I think that can be really valuable. Tash, what should people follow, or where should people look for your work if they want to see more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so we're on LinkedIn. I'm Natasha Joslin on LinkedIn, actually. And we are Mojo, Data Use Impact on LinkedIn also. And our website, which is www.wearemojo.co.uk.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely have that in the show notes as well. And it's been great getting to think with you about data and how to sort of organize it in a more effective way, whether that's an early organization trying to make a change, or somebody looking at their legacy of data. And I think, this has been very insightful for me, and I'm sure for a lot of listeners. So I really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed our chat.